How can we listen louder to employees and customers? What's the flapper valve theory? And what are the 3 keys of listening leadership? If we have ears to listen, Dr. Terry Paulson has the answers to these questions and more. Dr. Terry Paulson is a psychologist and author of such popular books as 50 Tips for Speaking Like a Pro and Paulson on Change. A prominent platform presenter as well, Dr. Paulson is a member of the International Speakers Hall of Fame. Listen as Dr. Terry Paulson explains the listening advantage.
Welcome to today's session, The Listening Advantage. I will guarantee you almost all of you have had training, extensive training, in reading and writing. But when it comes to the area of listening, the activity we probably do most, it is an area we just expect that, hey, if I got ears to hear, I listen. We're going to talk about some fresh perspectives on listening and what you can do to improve your listening skills as a leader. Now, let's start with the first key area. Make the conscious choice to listen. Make the conscious choice to listen. One of the difficulties we have is the sheer amount of information that we process. So when you have a lot of information coming at you, you tend to be a scanner as opposed to a listener. Many people do not even allow themselves to watch television anymore. They must be multitasking. If I'm watching a show, I'm doing something else along with it. We have gotten to the point that we tend to just basically scan, and if something is interesting, we will then break and focus. That's why catastrophes and problems end up getting our attention and bring us out of scan. If you're going to be an effective listener, realize first off, there are times you are a very good listener. There are other times you are not. It's your job to apply the skills you know in listening when it's important to you to listen. There will be many times you will have to scan. It's been said in the early 1900s that the average amount of information read by a person in a year was the equivalent of one Sunday edition of the New York Times. Imagine the amount of information you have to process. Just in self-defense, we end up being scanners. Know the importance of preparing to listen. When I am in a position where I've decided to listen, my first task is to remove distractions. I am easily distracted by a computer. I am easily distracted by other work that I'm working on. So I will say to the person, just a minute, let me write a note about where I was going. I call them orienting notes. If I'm working in my computer, I don't want to lose my train of thought. So to try to make sure that I will listen instead of maintaining my train of thought, I type in orient and I write the note about where I was going with my thought. The nice thing about that is it communicates to the other person that you're doing some important work. Many times they will say to you, oh, if that's that important, why don't you talk to me later? And you can write in the orienting note that you'll get back to them. The challenge is make a conscious choice to listen. Keep this in mind when you have people who don't listen well to you. Many times by going into their office to have a conversation, you've already lost the battle. Because they will not pay attention to you. They'll pay attention to their computer or the calls that interrupt them. The place and the location are as important as anything else. Look like a listener. Where your eyes are is where your focus is. Now, if I'm looking at the screen, I could probably repeat back what you're saying to me. But the message I'm giving the person is that you're not critical or important. Mary Kay, one of America's most effective entrepreneurs, had a sign on her desk that read, "Pretend around the neck of every employee is a sign that reads, 'Make me feel important.'" Listening is one of the key ways you communicate to another person that you are vital and important to me. Where did she get the idea for that? She said early on she was impressed by a speaker. At that time, she wasn't listening to tapes. She was listening to 78 records. In listening to a speaker and reading his works, she decided to go hear him speak. Afterwards, she went through the line to get him to sign the book that he had written. She noticed something. The speaker was spending time looking down the line to important people that were coming. And when they came to her, he did not even put the right name in the book. She said, if I ever become somebody, I will make sure that I make people feel important. Your focused attention makes people know that I care about what it is that you're saying. Another key point about listening. Let people know if it's not a good time to talk. You've heard the statement before, I always have an open door. Here's the frightening thing. You can have an open door and a closed mind. How many of you would like to know when your boss is approachable? Many of us go to our secretary or we go to somebody else. Is it a good time? I had one executive, and I'll never forget this guy. I was at a company, and I came in to talk about a program I was going to do with them. And I noticed that one of the executives had above his office door a stoplight, and it was red. I couldn't figure it out. All of a sudden, I looked over, and it was green. And so I asked the guy, I said, what's with this stoplight? The guy said, well, we had 360-degree feedback. And this guy is sometimes a great listener, and sometimes he's lousy. In fact, he was described by one person as Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. He can be a great listener, but he can also be abusive when you come in at the wrong time. When he saw that statement on his 360-degree feedback, he immediately realized they were right. So he got the whole team together, and he said, look, you guys are right. I know sometimes I don't listen well. Help us. Let's figure out a way we can problem solve together to beat this. One of the people said, it'd be nice if you could give us a sign. Now, obviously, the guy is somewhat of a concrete thinker because he immediately said, I have one. I have a traffic light at home in my garage. I'll bring that in. And the guy said, no, I didn't mean a real sign. I meant just, some way of indicating. He said, no, I like the sign. He said, I'll have it on red, and if it's on red, do not interrupt unless blood is involved, or it may be yours. Green, great time, put all calls through. It's a good time to talk. I will work with my secretary to keep me on green 40% of the day. How many of you would agree having 40% of the time available to talk with somebody? That's a pretty high percentage. How many of you need time to get work done? How many of you have times you need to be not interrupted? I had to meet this guy, so I went over and I asked him, I said, tell me about your sign. I said, do your people like it? I loved his reply. He said, ask them. I could be biased. So I immediately, over lunch, I just went around and I talked to some of his team. I said, tell me, what do you think about this light business? And this one guy was great. He said, I was embarrassed when he put it up. We are the only division whose division head has a traffic light. And then I realized he actually used it. And when it was green, he was very approachable and it was easy for me to talk. I love it. I only go in when it's green. I went back and I told the guy, I said, do you actually mean that when it's red, blood has to be involved? And I loved his reply. He said, are you kidding? Who takes seriously anybody who has a traffic light above their desk? I just know if somebody comes in when it's red, what do you know? Not only was it better it be serious, but they know because of the traffic light that if it's not serious, it's not a good time. So he knows if they come in when it's red, he knows they've made that judgment. And he's a better listener. He's prepared to listen because he feels it's very important. The job that you have is creating your own red and green light for people. There is nothing wrong with saying to anyone, personally or professionally, now's not a good time. Can I take 5 minutes to get closure on this so I could get back to you and we're going to have a better conversation then? If my wife interrupts me 5 minutes from the end of a football game that is close, the quality of our interaction is going to be minimal. And I believe it's appropriate to say, she is oblivious to the game, she could care less, she does not think it's important. It is important to me. Each of us have things that are important to us and we need to find ways of being able to communicate that to others. There's another key idea that is worth focusing on. Get beyond your flapper valve to listen louder. What an unusual statement. What is the longest period of time you can listen before you need a break from listening? Think about that for a moment. What are some of the numbers that are coming up in your mind? Anyone? 30 minutes? 14? 10? 2? You should have gone a long time ago. No, I'm just kidding. A lot of different numbers. Here's the interesting thing. I did not clarify what I meant by break or listen. If it means how long can I listen before I need to be out of a seminar, that may be the equivalent of how much coffee I've consumed. Then we can talk maybe an hour, hour and a half. Longest estimate was in Texas. I asked the question, this guy said 17 hours. Everybody laughed, and I immediately said, that's the longest estimate I've ever heard. And he immediately looked at me and everybody laughing, and he said, obviously it was wrong. I'm not going to tell you what I was thinking. What they found in research, the longest period of time that you can actually receive information before your brain must break to use it is 14 to 17 seconds. They call it the flapper valve theory. Here's what they say. Within a 14 to 17 second period of time, your listening has to stop and do something with the information it's received. The briefest is interpret. You had to decide what I meant by listening in terms of your vocabulary, what I meant by break and what you meant by break. That's a very brief flapper valve. Evaluate. Some of you, as soon as I said it, you didn't even wait for the second time. You just said, oh, I have to think. As soon as you're thinking, you're no longer listening. You see, I can tell if you're listening. When you're listening, you maintain eye contact and you blink at a frequency of every 3 to 8 seconds. If you are not blinking, you are staring using my forehead as a screen and you've gone to another channel. Now that's not entirely bad, because sometimes you're thinking about what I'm saying. You will also at times associate to another thought. How many times already have I reminded you of an experience, and instead of listening, you went to your thought, connected what I have said to your experience? That's an effective tool. That connects life experience and training, which allows us to retain information. The fourth thing that interrupts is you will act in some way. You're doing it right now. You're writing. Hi. As soon as you write or talk to somebody, remember in school when you had a teacher that tested on notes, and they talked so fast you couldn't get it all down? You're sitting there in the class going, hi, hi. And then the person next to you says, what did he say? And you go, now we're both behind. Thank goodness for tape recorders and other kinds of things. Now, understand it's amazing that communication occurs with flapper valve. But here's what you need to understand. Your job is to realize that it happens and to listen louder. Here's what I mean by listening louder. I know I can't stop flapper valve from occurring, but I can, with discipline, stay focused on the topic at hand. If I'm going to associate to another thought, I'm going to associate to a thought that relates to the topic. Because maybe my relating to that topic might bring something up that I might raise my hand and share as part of a conversation that would add to that communication. I work around the idea so the enrichment of my mind adds credence and depth to the material that I'm hearing. I will know this occurs because occasionally I will get feedback on one of my programs and they will say, I really love what you said about such and such. And I never said it. And then I realized they weren't blinking at that moment. They associated my program to another one they had attended and assumed that I had said it. I just include it in my next seminar because it usually is better than my other material. All right? This is why communication is difficult. Who are the hardest people for you to listen to? Who do you flapper valve quickest? People who talk too long. How many of you know people? Oh, for Pete's sake. What you do with them is you just nod. How many of you are good with those? You just keep nodding. Unfortunately, some people can talk forever with just a nod. We're giving them the cues to continue when in reality we should stop the conversation if it's something that isn't working. I will tell you the other person you tend to flapper valve quickest. Anybody you know well. Because you have so much probability data that you fill without having to listen. We go back to my football game. If I'm watching the game and my wife comes in and starts to have a significant conversation, what am I doing? I'm picking up a few key words, but I'm trying to watch the game. Then what does my wife say? All wives say the same thing. You're not listening to me. She's more assertive. And immediately, men, if we were smart, we would admit it. Because then we would have the full graces of forgiveness. But instead, most men say, yeah, I was listening. Then the wife always says the same thing. All right, what did I say? See, you've been to the same seminar. Right? What did I say? Now, I want you to know what is happening at that moment. It happens in the brain, and it's just why it's such a great gift our brain is. Because what your brain is doing is a rapid data search on the basis of what words you heard. All right, you're doing a search, and you put in the keywords you did remember, and your brain quickly goes to the highest probability file. Then you say to your wife what you were basically saying, and you use her eyes as a servo mechanism to decide whether you pick the right file. If they get real beady, wrong file, wrong file. If they get wide, I can't believe you really heard. And at the end of it, they go, that was a close call. Here's what I want you to remember about listening, and this is so vital. You cannot stop flapper valve, but you can make it less likely it interferes with communication. Whenever you know someone well, give them the keys to unlock your listening skills. There are two words that stop flapper valve from occurring as quickly. One is the word different, and the second is the word important. Give people the key to unlock your listening, important and different. Let's clarify that. If I say important, it's like that bulletin, news break. Oh, maybe this is important enough that scan will not be enough. Second, I've got something different I have to tell you. Different? What does it say to the man? No probability data. I'm going to have to listen carefully. Here's the frightening thing about communication is how lucky we are that communication occurs at all. Realize you may have a conversation that was very significant and you thought the person was listening. They may not have been. I like to say to my staff, I like to say to my children, I told my son early on, I know I won't always listen to you, and I really want to. There's nobody that's more important than you are. But give me some help. I want you to know, Sean, that if there's ever a time you need to talk to me and you say it's important, there's nothing going to stop me from taking time to be with you. But do not assume, as a father that is used to having a teenager, that I will always listen. I will listen when you let me know it's important. We need to do the same thing with the people we know. Keep in mind the person you are most likely to really not listen to on the job is somebody who's worked with you a long time. Would you agree that people change? People change significantly in what they think and feel. George Bernard Shaw said, the only person who treats me sanely is my tailor. Every time he meets me, he takes my measurements anew and treats my clothes accordingly. If you're going to be a good listener, be a tailor. You see, when I'm listening anew to somebody, I'm taking my measurements and I'm listening effectively to what you want now. There are a lot of us who lose customers because we think we know what they want, and we continue to provide it, but we haven't learned the additional new things they have that are important for them to take advantage of. If we aren't listening anew and taking new measurements, it's our competitors that are. I want to make sure I keep asking anew what it is that you need, so that if you have something new, I get to be the one who fills it. Another key point when it comes to the importance of listening. Just as we need to be ready to listen, we also expect that we are ready to share our comments and thoughts in return. Far too many times we think of good listeners as having very effective ears and they're able to understand and listen. Have you ever gone to a party where you felt you have told this person everything there is to know about you, and you have no idea who they even are? What happened is they put you in the talking seat. They made you very comfortable communicating, but you did not give information back that let them know that you're part of the conversation. One of the ways that we fuel communication and prove that you're a good listener is how on target you are with the comments you make. You know when it's lacking. If you've been at a party and somebody starts to say something and it's such a tangent, you go, where did they get that? If you're a good listener, you're listening intently for free information from the person, and you're ready to apply your experiences, your ideas, your values and opinions, and you provide free information to them, which allows them to then listen and respond and create a conversation. Our job is not just to listen, but to show that by listening we know assertively what to say that fuels the conversation to take it to another level. Here's another truth about listening. Listen for feelings and content. Every conversation you have has two levels occurring constantly. One is the issue orientation, content, what you believe, what are the facts, give me the data. The other is the emotional level, which gives a sense of whether the timing is right or if there's some other feeling that is interfering with my ability to communicate with you. Good listeners listen at both levels. You'll know you're not good at this if you hammer home on issues when no one is even listening to you. I have had times I've set up a sales situation where I've gone in to present what we're going to be talking about as a speaker. And even though I went a long distance, I realized that by the time I got there, the person I was talking to had received additional important information that made that appointment a distraction. Now, I could have taken that 15 minutes, and the gentleman was comfortable enough to give me the 15 minutes, but I knew the underlying feeling message is, please can we finish this so you can get out of here so I can get to the things that are really important? Instead of continuing to talk and just pressuring myself through, I listened to the feeling. And I said to him, I don't know about you, but even though I've scheduled sometimes programs, they just end up coming at the wrong time. I've got some other things I've got to do while I'm down here. Would it be better if I took an hour to give you some time to deal with this situation? Because I feel like I'm a distraction to something really important that you got to work on. And immediately he said, oh, I will be indebted to you. Thank you. I feel so badly about how far you have come. And I said, you know something? I know what it's like to have important things that come up. And it's your job to make that decision, and I'd be very glad to get a chance to take a little time. I'll do a couple other things, and I'll be back. When you're aware of the emotional tone of a conversation, you're much more attuned to timing, sensitivity. How many agree emotional sensitivity, emotional intelligence is something we hear a lot more about now? You don't hammer home material. You're looking for cues that allow you to make sure that timing is a part of what you do and that you do it effectively. Good listeners are good facilitators. Here's one of the key problems with our age. We spend too much time looking at television and computers. Computers and television do not care if you give energy back. Many of the younger generation don't animate as well when they're in a one-on-one conversation as older individuals do who've had the track record of learning conversational skills. If you've ever been in a meeting where no one gave you any energy, you know what it feels like. It's very hard to continue. The challenge of a listener is to not only have good ears and be listening intently for processing content, but to give the communication that I'm with you. We have what we call nonverbal and verbal facilitators or passing shots that you use. What that means is sometimes you'll say, interesting. Tell me more about that. I can't believe that. That's fascinating. Hey, dude. I mean, whatever it is that you've got to do, depending upon the person you're talking to, you're letting them know you're tracking. You will know the absence of this when you're on a telephone conversation and you feel like saying, are you there? It is the feedback that we receive that lets us know we're communicating on an important vein. I was once interviewed by a talk show on communication. It was very interesting because she wanted to take an hour on looking at communication. I said, that'd be great. But maybe we take a half an hour looking at communication that happens in business. And maybe the second half an hour, what if I interview you on how the media impacts communication? And she said, well, do you think really people would be interested in that? I said, hey, they watch your show. They're interested in how you do your work. Well, she said, I'll talk to the producer. Producer came back and said, love the idea. Then something happened. The closer we got to the date, the more she realized something. She had just given over control of the show to me. Because she didn't know what I was going to ask. Soon, the host was calling me on the phone. What are you going to ask me? And I said, that's interesting. You haven't told me what you're going to ask me. Maybe we'll talk about how it feels like to not know what you're going to be asked. And she said, I don't like this. Understand the power that you have as a listener. By tracking with the statements you say and by the questions you ask, you get to move people forward on issues that are important to you and to the organization. By giving those cues, oh, that's interesting. You're letting them know that vein of the conversation is tracking, so they keep giving additional information. When you want more, you ask questions that facilitate getting more information in targeted areas. That's where good listeners use open questions. How did you get into that? Don't make them so open that they go, oh, I don't want to take the time. Try that with a teenager. How was your day? Good. When I talk to a teenager, I'm more likely to say, tell me one thing you did today that you really felt good about. They'll give you one. A parent's worth one. The same kind of thing when you're asking questions. Learn to give questions that are targeted, open, but concise. That allows you to direct the focus of the conversation to the things that matter most to you and to the individual. By being a good facilitator, by taking the time to ask questions that are effective, you end up getting the fuel that allow you to be a very good listener. We've been talking a lot about listening, but how many of you agree there are many times you don't want them to continue talking, you want to be able to end the conversation? You see, some people need no help to continue to talk for hours. Now, here's what I want to share with you. I believe it is critical that you understand the very things that facilitate listening are things that you can use to end the conversations. Instead of asking open questions, I'm going to ask closed ones. The one that I like to use, because with certain people you can never get a time to even break in. I will all of a sudden say, wait a minute. They stop. And then it's my turn to speak. I say, what time is it? They immediately look at their watch and tell you the time. And I say, whoa, you know, I've got a lot of things I've got to get back to. It certainly was good talking to you. And then I move to a summary. How many of you agree? As soon as you get to the summary, this baby's almost over. So as soon as you say, let's summarize what we've discussed, the interesting thing is, if they have something more to discuss, at least you've got a new agenda. And it's more likely to be interesting. Most of the time, they've covered what they have covered, and that is a time for you to check for reception. Because if you've got somebody who has been talking a long time, you may very well have stopped listening. And they may have asked you to do something that you nodded your head yes to. So when you use a summary, it's your way of saying to a person, let me summarize what we've decided. I want to make sure we're on track together. I use the summary, and at the end, ask for agreement. And here's one of the final things that I will share as it relates to this. Use your calendar as a follow-up tool. You can be a very good listener, but if you don't do anything with what you're receiving, you will lose credibility very quickly. Some people listen well, but have no follow-up. I use my calendar. In their presence, I say, let me get back to you on Friday, and I make a note in my calendar. When they know it gets in my calendar, they know I'm going to have it done. It also gives me a reminder to call back to that individual and to let them know that indeed you have followed through. I think one of the problems about leadership is many times we do listen to our people, but we forget to get back to them to let them know we did. When you call somebody up and said, the conversation we had last week, I want you to know, as I said, I went and I contacted so-and-so, and I am